welcoming Gino Kenny, our man in the Dáil, who's been there on the side of cannabis for so long, fighting our corner. And so we're going to get into. He's got another bill on, dropping on January 31st. So that's the focus of tonight's call, and let's hear what it's about. First of all, Gino, I know there's a lot of people who don't have a clue about the politics that's involved in delivering and getting a bill onto the tabled in the Dáil. So maybe would you frame that for me? How does a bill get started, and how did it get to where it's now?
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for your invite. This bill, for instance, took a long time to put together. The legal advice I started was a long process, actually a process that was much longer than I ever envisaged that it would happen. So eventually, when the bill was got the green light in relation to putting it forward, that was in November of 2022.
22,
yeah. So I introduced the bill into the Dáil, and once that happens, then it's on the books as such. And then what you can do, you can put it into a lottery system of opposition bills, or some parties have private members' time. So, for example, we probably have private members' time 4 or 5 times a year. Now, it didn't get selected in the lottery, because these are opposition bills. There could be 20, 30 bills at one time. So it didn't get selected, but we've now decided, people for profit, to use our private members' time on the 31st of January. So there will be a 2-hour debate, and then there will be a vote that night. And we'll get an indication from the government, obviously just prior or just before the bill, to kind of give an indication what the government intend to do. They may say, look, we'll let this bill go forward in relation to not having a vote, or they may put an amendment to that bill. I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what their approach is in relation to this bill. And it's obviously very and what happens afterwards, Stephen, if it gets kind of a vote to proceed, then it goes into one of the committees that's set up in the Dáil, which in this case I think would be the Justice Committee, and they look at the bill, and there's been in that kind of environment in the past, that usually has been the graveyard for opposition bills, not just in the Justice Committee, but largely opposition bills largely don't go anywhere, even though they pass this stage. But sometimes they can push the government into producing their own bill, and if that happens, no problem with that. So, but the main thing for us is that this gets starts a discussion, starts a debate, and it's very good timing, because obviously the Citizens Assembly report will be out a week prior to that, and the Citizens Assembly has recommended a different approach in relation to decriminalisation. So it's very apt that we have this bill on the 31st, and hopefully the government will take them recommendations on, and on our bill in relation to changing the status quo, because obviously the status quo doesn't work, and stop criminalising people for drug use in general. But in this instance, this bill is a very, very moderate bill. And we would like to go much further and have a regulated system, where they've done it in other countries.
Just within the process, Gino, sorry to cut across you. So within that process, there's the initial stage, and then there's an amendment stage. And who is that? Who does the amendments there, or how does that work?
Yeah. Now these are kind of the machinations of the Dáil, right? So what happens is that if the bill was to proceed, it goes to the Justice Committee to discuss and then they make a recommendation on an opposition bill. They could recommend to the government that, yeah, they would recommend that this bill goes further in relation to amendments and possible legislation, right? So
And
that's a possibility.
who comprises that Justice Committee? Like, I mean, who's involved there?
Well, so there's about 13 or 14 members of the Justice Committee, and there'd be a kind of cross-party kind of PDs and centres. And they've been quite progressive on the issue of Decrim, very progressive in this Dáil.
Right.
So that's what happens. They kind of, they scrutinise the bill, and then they make a report back to the government to say, look, it's in our opinion, in our view, that this bill should progress to the next stage, and that's where amendments are drawn in. But Stephen, it's quite uncommon for opposition bills to be legislated for. It's not very frequent that it does happen. But let's give it a go.
You've had one through the system before, 2016,
Yeah.
and I've read all 41 pages of it, and I thought it was fantastic bill because it covered many of the things that people really feel dearly about, things like the right to grow, things like a level of recreational use. It was kind of it ticked a lot of boxes, and people are always asking me like, what happened to that bill? It was the medical cannabis specifically act, and it ended up we got results from that bill. So
yeah, you're correct. In 2016, in July, can you believe that?
yeah,
That we introduced a bill around medical cannabis. So long story short, eventually the government did change the legislation around the Misuse of Drugs Act, around the access to medical cannabis. So this kind of process, as a consequence of that, the medical cannabis access program was set up. Now it's very, very restrictive, and we've been very critical of that. So now that's still ongoing. There's a review in relation to whether it's going to be expanded or not. This review is taking forever. But so it can be done if you push the government into a certain kind of, I suppose, direction. And normally, sometimes that can happen where you have an opposition bill. The government then won't take your bill on, but they will introduce their own legislation. And if that happens, I'm fine with that, as long as it does what you set out to happen. Now, obviously, we'd like to see the MCAP much more broader in relation to conditions that cannabis can treat. So, but there is precedent, and we've shown that we have done that in the
yes.
past relation to so look at that's so it can happen even though it's restrictive.
I'd say, Gino, look, I certainly applaud it, and I mean, there's families who are directly kind of benefited from that, and obviously, I'm thinking in the next weeks I will actually be speaking with Dr. Joe Rosado. Joe Rosado was the doctor of Abigail, and who's sadly passed this last June, literally within weeks of Ava Barry dying as well, which is so we have two martyrs on this thing. So there is real, like, it's great that I mean, there's still people gaining from that MCAP that got however limited. I fall through the cracks, so it's certainly not complete. I have MS, top condition listed, but my problem is I don't have spasticity, so that is admittedly an incomplete kind of result, but at least it got something done, and I absolutely accept that. How does it, can I just, while we're on it, just to finish it and move back to the current bill? So I mean, what's the status with MCAP? How many, do you have any numbers on what's happening with that?
I think it's just over 50.
Over 50
people have got access since, I think, over 2 years. So it's very, 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 very small. It's extremely small. Now there's a review that was started like 2.5 years ago, in relation to, looking at the kind of the clinical analysis of whether to expand the bill or expand the MCAP. We're still waiting for that review. It's kind of the review is done by the Health Research Board, and they make a recommendations then to the Department of Health to say, look at whether to expand the program. Now, the Minister, Hildegard Naughton, has stated in an interview this week in the Irish Independent that she actually agrees that the program should be expanded. Now, take from that what you will, but the main thing is that the MCAP has to expand, because if it doesn't expand, then it becomes it becomes paralysed to a certain degree, and it doesn't really move on. So it has to include other conditions. Now, whether they make recommendations, they could make a recommendation that it stays the way it is. If it does, I don't know really if the MCAP will have a future.
What's your thoughts on? People kind of feel like the big skeleton in the room or elephant in the room is the idea that chronic pain is the big one that is being avoided because it opens up too big a kind of funding requirement. And what do you think about that?
No, because I remember going to the Department of Health about 7 years ago, and they explained the rationale in relation to omitting chronic pain, and they said, look, they gave the reasons why was that it was too broad, and there is already lots of medications that can treat chronic pain. Now, I did say that some of them medications that can treat chronic pain, the side effects can be pretty grim for some people.
Sure.
In the Danish medical cannabis access program, I think they've narrowed it down to neuropathic pain. So that narrows it down. And chronic pain is a very broad term, but if it was narrowed down to say neuropathic pain, I'd be fine with that, and others will be fine with that. But it needs to expand. The program needs to expand. Otherwise, I really don't know where it's going to go. Now, actually, somebody said to me today that there could be the situation could happen in Ireland where it's happened in Britain, where basically the private kind of clinics could, and in theory they've done it in Britain, where they could actually say, look, we're going to prescribe it to people that need medical cannabis for particularly any condition. That could happen. But
that would only be within a private context, and so it's not like the MCAP is essentially about reimbursement through
exactly.
It's funded, and so I've had a couple of talks with one clinic, particularly Medican, and nice guys, and they're after setting up a surgery, I believe, out in Beaumont, and so they're actively I wouldn't say procuring patients. I don't know if that's the right term, but they are in Ireland and actively seeking to prescribe. So presumably the only way that can happen, and I think it is the only way that can happen, is via the ministerial license. So or whatever.
Yeah. Or any or via the MCAP to a certain degree. Any of the kind of listed products under the MCAP. That's what could happen. But I think that's limited.
Listed products and listed conditions. And
So but look, hopefully this review comes back and it recommends it broaden the MCAP out. Hopefully that happens. It's meant to happen. It was meant to happen, said last year, sorry. But the latest I got it will be the first quarter of this year. So I recently put a question to the Minister of Health asking, when is this review going to take place, and I should get that response back tomorrow.
Very good. And fair play to you for over the years hammering that, being that pain in the government ass in the Dáil for so long. It takes a lot of resilience.
No, certainly does, Stephen. It certainly does. You want to have the patience of a saint in this business, I have to say. But look, I think it's worth kind of I suppose the kind of the time and effort, because when you do see people that have benefited from medical cannabis, you know, that's all the kind of frustration that goes with it. It's worth it when you see actually people benefiting. So,
man, there's
but
no
you
way.
want to see more. You'd like to see more people benefiting.
Yeah, so well done to. I'll speak on behalf of the patients who did get some results from that program, and I mean the program is still live. There's still people on
Yeah.
it, so there's no. It's not something that's from the past. So so on that, we go back to the kind of current bill. So the current bill is primarily driven at a decriminalisation. And so I was very struck by Aidan O'Riordan stood up in the Dáil and kind of recounted. He put a number of 6,200 people who have been they're not, I can't say criminalized, but they have entered the criminal justice system. And by now, by the end of year, it would possibly be 7,000 people. So what this bill is about?
Exactly, Stephen. As I said, it's a very moderate bill. And what it does is, if it was legislated for tomorrow, it would amend the Misuse of Drugs Act, particularly around cannabis, obviously. At the moment, you can't possess cannabis on your possession. In theory, you can be criminalized for like any, small amounts. What this would do, up to 7 grams, and that can be changed at committee stage. But I've just picked 7 grams because Malta and Luxembourg, I think had stipulated 7 grams. So somebody could have up to 7 grams on their possession without ever being prosecuted.
Right.
There's limitations to that, even because then, what I envisage to do, if it gets to committee stage, is to support the issue around home cultivation, which is important. Kind of cannabis clubs. So if it gets to committee stage, it can be expanded into suggesting them ideas, but at the moment, the legal advice I got was just to keep it simple as possible. So I went with that legal advice for now, but it can be expanded at committee stage.
So can you just describe how that could happen? Like, can somebody from any party, Labour or anybody, stand up and say, okay, we'd like to see a right to grow added to this, or we'd like to see cultivation, we'd like to see the clubs. I mean, I think Labour have a position on clubs. That I'm choosing Labour, I don't know why, but a couple of the parties do have a position on clubs. I think the Greens were very pro Amsterdam coffee shop model, but there is voices out there for recreational or adult use.
No, I mean, if the bill went to committee stage, kind of other kind of amendments can be added, and literally that bill could look completely different from what it is now. So there could be stipulations around home cultivation, which I think is a very good idea. And kind of cannabis, social cannabis clubs, where now you obviously have to tease all that stuff out, but that can be added in into this bill at a later stage. Now, or you can have a different bill in relation to home cultivation and cannabis clubs. So all that can be done, but this bill can look completely different from what it looks now to a later stage. So all this can be added in, at a later stage.
Right. So, but so as all the activists out there, then that would become their focus, would be to push the other politicians from the other parties to kind of live up to their promises, like the Greens or whoever made their promises about the Amsterdam model, and that would be something that we could get stuck into in terms of.
I think so, Stephen, as I said, and I know some people have kind of concerns that the bill it's not broad enough, but and I agree. But look, let's start with this. Let's see how it moves on to the next stage. And we can put all these stipulations in at a later stage in relation to if it was to be legislated for. But primarily at this moment in time, it's a decriminalisation bill where it basically decriminalises somebody that has in their possession up to 7 grams of cannabis. And that's basically
within your experience then of knocking around these halls of power, are you finding, I mean, a couple of people there's a couple of politicians have appeared, let's say, over these last, within this Dáil, we've had a few kind of politicians from, there's 2 guys from Fianna Fáil who became quite vocal and they had their podcast and different things. So how do you feel it's moving in a general direction?
That's good question, Stephen. I think public opinion has changed around this issue, and the Citizens Assembly kind of reflects that. And I think, if you've done a straw poll, and there's been a number of polls done in the last year in relation to decriminalisation for drugs for personal use, I think there would be a majority of people that would support the issue of stop criminalizing people for personal drug use, right? I think there's a clear now majority that would support that, when you put all the facts on the table. So that's kind of going in the right direction. But whether legislators want to do that, I would, hold my counsel in relation to, because obviously, when they kind of, and they didn't enact legislation, but it was a directive to the police in relation to if somebody is found with small amounts of cannabis, is basically give them a kind of a warning. But that is extremely arbitrary, extremely arbitrary. And there's still people being brought to court for small amounts of cannabis. So the only way to definitively is to change, you have to amend the Misuse of Drugs Act. Because you can't give a direction to one police station and the other police station does something completely the opposite from the other police station, So basically this piece of legislation amends the Misuse of Drugs Act, so somebody can have up to 7 grams of cannabis on their possession without being criminalised. And that, again, that can be changed at committee stage, but that's what this piece of legislation is about. And hopefully it's just hopefully it's a precursor to a regulated system. And that's what
January 31st. January 31st it'll play out in the Dáil from 10 a.m. I believe. And
exactly.
Just a little note for people: if people want to get into the public gallery, they have to contact you personally.
They would have to email me, Stephen. So the debate starts at 10. On Wednesday the 31st, it goes on for 2 hours. There may be a vote that evening. But if they want to come to the public gallery, they have to email me with details of the name and be at at Leinster House at 9:30. There's limited amount of seats, but at the moment there's about 35 people interested in coming to the public gallery. So so that's what happened. And so it'll be an interesting debate.
Yeah, so the debate, will people know as it goes on? It'll continue through the day, will it?
No, just for 2 hours.
Just for 2 hours?
Yeah, it's a 2-hour debate. So obviously all parties and none have a lot of time. So obviously the proposals of the bill, which is People for Profit, we have about half an hour of that 2 hours to speak. So all the other parties, the government, Sinn Féin, Soc Dems, Labour, the Independents, and who else am I forgetting? Yeah, so everybody basically has a lot of time to basically speak against or for the legislation. That's the way it works. Yeah, and if there's a vote, then there's a vote.
It's great to understand it, and if people want to people want to organize themselves to hit the streets outside or do whatever, it's completely up to them what they want to do.
It's up to them if they want to if they want to have a rally outside, and that morning, they're free enough to come along, whatever, that's, or
People
whether
kind
other
of feel,
organizations, if
yeah,
other
I would say that
organizations,
people kind of feel like there's everything seems to has it feels like everything has to happen in increments, and this is another kind of case where we're looking for
yeah,
increments to move things forward, and
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And as I said, the Citizens Assembly have recommended, you know, changing the status quo, and I think it's highly significant. That's what's happened, but now we have to push on and reflect, public opinion. But the only people that really, really can do that is the legislators, and the legislators. Obviously, I'm a legislator, but obviously the government have the numbers to legislate for, and they can, they can change the law overnight if they wanted it. Now, is there an appetite for it? I'm quite skeptical. To a certain degree, I think there's elements of the government that are happy enough with the status quo, and there would be elements of happy to go even more medieval than the status quo. But there are some people in the government that definitely want to see the status quo changing, and whether that's in decriminalisation or being more liberal than that, that will be kind of teased out over time.
I'd say there was a lot of feeling, to be honest, that the Citizens Assembly was, it was very slighted, and it was skewed into a kind of very much negative kind of spaces. Like there was a lot of, and people kind of felt that was a little bit of almost like a civil service construct, that the
Yeah,
destination was known first, and we were just going through 200 hours and 120 speakers to arrive at a certain destination, a
yeah,
preordained.
yeah. No, I think there's a bit of truth in that. Um, and I think we've been quite critical of some of the makeup of the people that were on that kind of steering committee and so forth. But by saying that, the citizens that were on it, that had the competition of 99 people, they made a decision to say, look, the status quo doesn't work. Right?
Absolutely.
That's a clear indication that it doesn't work. And what they have advocated for is a policy called decriminalisation. And decriminalisation, stops criminalising people for using drugs. And that's a clear indication, regardless of how you dress it up. That was the clear indication from the Citizens Assembly, and that's, in order to do that, you need to change the law. As simple as that. You need to
Yeah.
change the law. Where people are not criminalised for drug use. Now, obviously,
Well,
Air Bill just concentrates on cannabis, but obviously, in the broader scheme of things, we're like decriminalisation. I'm fully supportive of decriminalisation, but even decriminalisation has its limitations.
one of the aspects that was very alarming, I would say, in the Citizens Assembly was particularly our police didn't cover themselves in glory in terms of when how pro stop and search that they were vocally. And it's a fact raised by Cron at the time that there's more stop and searches happening in Ireland than there is in London. And London has obviously
Right.
massive, it's multiples of the population, and but there's a real,
Yeah.
the Citizens Assembly it showed things for what they are, as well as being maybe giving us a feeling for what what the public feels.
Yeah.
But the citizens ask good
Definitely. Yeah.
questions, but
No,
it's
definitely. And I mean, there was elements of the Citizens Assembly that were Jurassic in their thinking, literally Jurassic,
yeah.
you know. Um, and but the Citizens Assembly is about the ordinary people of this country, and that's what makes up. They have their own thoughts and own ideas, and some people would be pro, some people would be against, some people are all in the middle,
Sure.
some people have concerns about certain. So all that kind of kaleidoscope of ideas. But ultimately, they said, look, things have to change. So
Yeah.
You know, Citizens Assembly in the past have been quite progressive on a lot of issues. So on this issue, they have said, look, we need to move on from a model of 6 decades that simply criminalizes people, doesn't work. You know, our prisons are full of people that are in the kind of, suppose, have been involved in the drugs complex from the top to the bottom. Criminalizing people doesn't work. We need to look at something different. That's what the Citizens Assembly have said, and we need to move on. We need to move on to a better system that, you know, looks at things differently. You know, and
And it's a
yeah,
massive issue, the amount of money being wasted here. The amount of money
completely.
within this criminal justice system and within the prisons. I seen a headline today: the prisons are full, and they have no, and the backlogs for testing, backlogs for
Yeah,
everything. So it's a
yeah.
broken.
It's broken, Stephen. It's broken, and you know, we'll look back hopefully very soon that, you know, why did we not do this sooner in relation to, you know, stop criminalizing people and looking at a different model, you know, of, you know, regulation and um and decriminalizations. It's like, it's common sense, right? Now look at, I'm preaching to converted, and the people that will be looking at this are saying, yeah, look at, we need to do this tomorrow. But you know, I think it's going in the direction where, you know, things will hopefully move on, and we'll see a system where, you know, people are just not criminalized anymore for personal drug use. Now there's a whole set of circumstances that we have to go through, but look, at least we're getting this discussion going, and it does take a bit of time and it takes a lot of patience. But you know, this is the first bill in relation to, well, it's the first bill in 8 years in relation to amending the Misuse of Drugs Act. But and then since Ming's bill in 2014, I
13,
think. So
13, I
yeah,
believe.
13, yeah. So it's very rare that bills come forward in relation to changing the Misuse of Drugs Act in a more progressive way.
Yeah.
So, and the composition of the Dáil, if you had to ask me on an individual basis, you know, would they support this? I think I think it'd be I think it'd be I think there's a fair few people that would actually agree with this bill. You'd be surprised. On a personal basis, take the parties out of it, but you know, there would be obviously people against. But you know, and obviously parties have to vote on their policy. But we'll see. We'll see what happens on the
Well, the
31st.
thing is
And
that that's a thing, actually. Like, I mean, they vote like on their policy, but I mean, if you're a green TD and you're voting
yeah,
on your policy, their stated policy is written in their manifesto before they went into
exactly.
this
Yeah,
binding agreement, that they were pro liberating laws, at least,
yeah,
and Sinn Féin Sinn Féin are always just on the medical cannabis mantra, but
yeah,
they're moving slightly. But it is difficult that cannot get
yeah.
across to
No,
people. So
yeah.
you know, I look at Gino. I'm going to kind of wrap it up there because I want to
Great.
let you go back. You're a busy
Me
dude.
back. Me back is
There's
on 1%.
yeah,
Me
yeah.
battery's on 1%. I forgot to
Okay.
plug it in.
Well, I'll tell
Sorry.
you, no worries, Gina. Look, I'm so grateful for you coming on, and you show up, and that's the most important. And I see you showing up on everything. And we know that we're so riddled with causes at the moment. This is one of the, as a cannabis activist myself, it's one of the issues we have, is that getting above the noise is so
Yeah,
difficult because this whole migration thing is so messy. And look, we have a live genocide happening in Gaza. There's so much out there, and
yeah,
so look at. We really hope this matters to people, though, you know, and it matters
yeah,
to the patients. I'm here like in Barcelona because I can't be legal in Ireland. I can't grow for myself in Ireland. I have the ability. I grow for myself here, and I can't do that in Ireland. Why not?